All right, guys. So I was just doing some writing, and I felt like I should make a video, and then I made a video, and it was like 10 minutes long, and then the mic wasn't plugged in all the way, and the audio isn't there. So this is like the second time I'm doing it. Right. So the issue that I'm working through right now is how to solve the world's problems, which is a little bit ambitious, but it's been on my mind a lot recently, and I'm trying to figure it out. So if you want to solve the world's problems, you have to first acknowledge what the problems are, and you have to differentiate between the cause of the problems and the symptoms of the problems. Because if you work on treating the symptoms, the problems are going to stay, they're going to remain. But if you actually get to the core and get to the root of where the problems are coming from, then you have a chance at fixing them. So we can all agree that the world currently is plagued with issue after issue after issue. There's famine, there's death, there's sickness, there's politics, there's war, there's all these things going on that are damaging society. And then if we look at it from a societal perspective, and we look at all the social issues going on right now, like LGBTQ, abortion, like all of these problems, society as we know it is falling apart. And you can say, okay, well, that's because they put this policy into place. That's because no, them putting the policy into place to make more money is again a symptom of the problem. It's not the cause. So what's the cause? Well, the cause is that we removed God from society, because God is the moral law. It is the foundation of truth that society was built on. So if you rug pull the truth, then everything will fall apart. I wrote down, if man thinks, he finds God. If man finds God, man solves problems, because God equals higher moral law. So when you ask a lot of people today who haven't necessarily thought through the whole issue, but a lot of Christians would say, when you ask, what's wrong with the world? They would say, oh, well, there's sin. Okay, but let's break that down just for a second. What is sin? Well, sin is the absence of God. So inherently, when people are describing what's wrong with the world and they're saying it's sinful, well, they're saying it's absent of God. Because when you build a society that's based on God and rooted in truth, rooted in the Ten Commandments that Moses gave for the law in the Old Testament, that led to a moral society. In our society, our government in America was based on the old Judaic law. Our judicial system is based on that. So when you step away and you remove God from society, well, something will take its place. That something is not going to be inherently good. It's just like the empty vessel in Matthew that Jesus talks about, when a man had a demon and Jesus cast out the demon, and then the man didn't fill himself with the Holy Spirit or fill himself with pursuing God. 7 more demons came and took its place. It's the same thing. If we remove God from school, if we remove God from society, something else will take its place. So if man thinks, man finds God. And if man finds God, man solves problems. But what does it mean to think, truly? Our minds are a gift from God that we use to connect with God. Our soul dwells in our body, and our soul uses our mind, which is a tool from God, so that we may communicate with God. Now, to think, I wrote, to think is to process information in a manner that is intended to reach a true conclusion. So when we think through an issue to reach a true conclusion, we are, in a sense, dancing with an idea to try to find truth. What is truth? To think with the pursuit of truth is to use logic. But what is truth? Truth is a universal constant. There's no particular truth. There's only universal truth. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. But Jesus equates himself with the truth. It says in John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So all at once, when God speaks life into the universe, we see time, space, and matter all coming into being at the same time. But if we look at the code that holds the universe together, is math and science and logic. Because math, 1 plus 1 is 2, at the very simple basic level. If this is true and this is true, then this is true. It's still a logical equation. Science, the scientific method, purpose, hypothesis, materials, procedure, results, conclusion. I think this might happen if I do this and this. Let me try it to see if it happens. It's still, if I do this and if I do this, then this happens. It is a logical equation. So you can say that logic, just like math and science, were not created by man. They were discovered by man, because God created them at the beginning of time when he created the universe. So that logic is the code that holds the universe into being. And to say it more eloquently, Logic is the language of God, because not only is it the code that holds the universe in place, but logic is also the language that we speak when we communicate with God, because when we think, our minds are our connection with God. Therefore, when we think in pursuit of truth, Jesus saying that he is the truth. So, putting a similarity between truth and God, when we think to try to find a true conclusion, we're using logic to try to find truth. In the same way, when we think and we use logic, we are speaking the language of God in pursuit of finding God, in pursuit of building a relationship with God. Therefore, when I think to try to find truth, it is the same as speaking the language of God to try to better and build a relationship with him. And I wrote down and made an equation for this. I said, thinking equals logic. Logic equals the language of God. Language of God leads to relationship with God. And logic leads to truth. And God equals truth. So I wrote this down as well, is that the problem with society stems from people are not thinking because they don't know logic. Therefore, they cannot communicate with God using his own language. Therefore, they cannot find truth or know God. People must think to find God. Solution is to teach people logic. So, if God is the foundation that society must be built on, because God is truth, then when you remove God and you remove truth from society, society will crumble. Jesus gives the example in the Sermon on the Mount when he says, the man who builds his house on the rock, when the storms come, his house will stand, but the man who builds his house on the sand, when the storm comes, his house will fall apart. So what does the rock represent? Well, the rock represents a foundation of truth in Jesus Christ, in the Word of God. So how do we build and construct a foundation of truth for society? Well, we do it through thinking and reasoning and speaking the language of God, so that we can know God, so that we can find truth, so that we have a functioning society. But we can all agree that the people of today as a whole lack the ability to think. And we've seen a turn away from God. Now that pendulum is swinging back as we see this revival happening in our country and in our world right now, with everybody recognizing the God-shaped hole they have at the center of their heart and turning back to God as a result. But part of the reason why society has turned away from God, we can date back all the way to the early 1900s, when the father of the modern school system, Rockefeller, said that I want a nation full of workers, not a nation full of thinkers. And we've seen an intentional effort over the last century to slowly, gradually eliminate the modern man's ability to think. And as a result, their connection with God has diminished and they have turned from God, leading to nihilism. And especially with the propagation of the theory of evolution, why it's a theory and not a law is because they cannot prove it to be true. Because if they could prove it to be true, it would be a scientific law. But if the theory of evolution is true and we evolved from a single cell organism, we're floating on a rock in space, we are an accident, we are not supposed to be here, then there is no purpose to our lives. Therefore, if there is no purpose to our lives, we can do whatever we want all of the time. This ideology has led to the decline of society as a whole. We see crime rising. We see people trying to fill the God-shaped hole in their heart with all sorts of things, like the LGBTQ movement. We see a rise in school shootings. These people are thinking, well, if we're just here by accident and nobody has inherent value, then why not just go kill a bunch of people? That's an insane thing to think, but it stems from a philosophy of nihilism that comes from the theory of evolution. And it comes from removing God from society. Because if God was in society, that person who shot up the school, if that person knew that he was created in the image of God and the people he's killing were created in the image of God, it would never cross his mind as something he should do. That's why the modern philosophy of nihilism is so dangerous, but nihilism also opens the door to hedonism. I can do whatever I want all the time. I can go party and drink every night. I can go do drugs every night. I can go have sex every night because there's no point in my life. There's no reason I'm here, so I might as well just fill the hole with everything that I can get my fingers on. Again, this is wrong. And again, this leads to the destruction of society. So we can argue about what the symptoms are and which ones we should solve and how we should solve them. But the truth is that the symptoms cannot be eliminated until we fix the root cause. And the root cause is that God has been removed from society. And how do we reach God? This is also what I wrote the other day. If man thinks, he finds God. If man finds God, man solves problems because God equals higher moral law. But I mean, that's the fundamental problem with our society, is that people have turned away from God, and they've turned away from God because they've lost the ability to think. They've lost the ability to speak his language. So, solution to solve all of the world's problems: teach everyone how to think. That's it. That's the solution. And it's dangerous. It's not for the faint-hearted, because what happens to people when they teach people how to think? Well, usually they die or they're imprisoned. Socrates was teaching the youth how to think, and then the youth didn't want to go to war, so Socrates was imprisoned and ended up dying. Now look at Jesus, the greatest leader who has ever existed. Leadership being defined as influence. Jesus having influence on billions of people over 2,000 years since he was alive. What did they do? They hung him on a cross and killed him. Jesus, being the embodiment of the Son of God, he is God in human form, rose again from the dead, defeating sin and defeating death. But the society's reaction to a man coming along and disrupting the powers that be was textbook. Because when man's power is threatened, man responds violently. And man can only have ultimate power in the absence of God. Therefore, if every man has the ability to think, then every man will not be willing to give ultimate power to a fellow man. They will see God as being the only authority responsible enough to possess ultimate power, because he is the giver of life and created all. The founding fathers actually said it best, because they said, we, in the Declaration of Independence, it's hilarious, I have a copy of the Constitution right here, but I have it memorized, is we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's just the first part of the Declaration of Independence. But they say we hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident meaning anyone can come to that conclusion of these truths through thinking. Well, what were the truths that they were talking about? They said all men are created equal under God and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That being said, they are concluding that God is real and given people rights based on what is self-evident and what they can observe. Therefore, every man has the ability to find God and to know God, because every man is given the gift of having an intelligent mind. Yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching.